Thank you for
Sounds
asking
good
all
to
of us.
me.
Good e-
That sounds great.
Outstanding. Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to Couch Conversations with the Doctors, where health is wealth. What night is it tonight? It is Monday night, and it is time for Couch Conversations with the Doctors. As always, we're going to go around our esteemed panel and we're going to introduce all of our panelists who are here with us on every Monday night. And we're going to start with the man who is an art connoisseur, our very own Joseph Harrington. Joe Harrington.
Thank you, Nikki. And again, thank you, Congressman Davis, for providing us with this platform. My name is Joe Harrington, retired public health and healthcare professional. Worked at three different hospitals, retired in 2017 from the Illinois Department of Public Health, where I was the regional health officer for Cook County and an administrative law judge.
Outstanding, and thank you so much to the man who leaves us and goes and have fun in the sun, but he's been experiencing some weather difficulties himself. That's our very own Dr. Douglas Graham. Doug?
Well, if I didn't know better, I'm back in the Windy City. I mean, it's really blowing out here. I'm a retired physician. I worked in the western suburbs for 30 years and then spent 2 years in the congressman's office. And it was an eye-opening experience. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be here. I'm going to try and answer your questions the best I can.
Outstanding, and thank you so very much to the man who says I threaten him to be here every Monday night, but he seems to always be on time. Now, I've given him a little time to have a little vacation, but he is back and he is ready to roll. And that's our very own Dr. James Miller. Dr. Miller?
Well, just want to say good evening to everybody, and we're happy to be back. And I want to again thank the congressman and you, Nikki, for having this platform for us to come and to express ourselves and to answer questions and to do what we can to connect the community to a better health and hopefully better lives. So we're here to do what we can to contribute to healing our community.
Thank you so very much to the man who is the urologist of the stars, but he hates accolades. That's our very own Dr. Terry Mason. Dr. Mason?
Thank you, Nikki, for that very kind introduction. And I'm just grateful to be here with my esteemed colleagues and the congressman and you, and hopefully we'll be able to contribute something and maybe even something stimulating for you to think about after the show is over.
Outstanding, and thank you so very much. Well, to the man who makes it possible for us to be here each and every Monday night, to the one who teaches us that true wealth is health. That's what he teaches us, that health is wealth. To the vanguard on healthcare, the congressman of the Illinois 7th Congressional District, our very own Congressman Danny K. Davis.
Well, let me thank all of you for being a part of these discussions. And I know that there are people who often wonder sometimes what good are discussions. And I think when you get around to it, knowledge is a big contributing factor to quality of life. And it seems to me that what it is that we hope to do is improve the quality of life. And I think we can do it individually as individuals learn how to better take care of themselves in terms of their own health. But then as we collectively discuss issues that sometimes might lead to solutions to problems. And if we can come up with a solution every once in a while, or if we can reduce, someone asked me the question about crime. And I said to the person, if we can reduce poverty, we probably can reduce crime. If we can promote enlightenment, we probably can reduce crime. If we can change the economy or economic plight for lots of people, we probably can reduce crime. And so all of those factors combine themselves to be causes, but to also be solutions. And doctors and scientists can do so much. But the bottom line ultimately becomes what it is that individually we do as it relates to our individual health, and what it is that communities do that relate to the health of the community. And of course, as that get expanded, it becomes the health of the nation. And so I hope that leads us into that, because we can make a difference. And so I thank each one of you for helping to make the differences that need to be made. So thank you, Nikki, for facilitating this and giving us all the opportunity to weigh in. And thank you, gentlemen, very much.
Outstanding, Congressman. I see we have Dr. Pete Thomas, who has joined us just as well. That's the DJ by night and doctor by day.
Hey, Nikki.
Go ahead.
Nikki, I'm so excited to be back with my colleagues. I'm looking forward to a great conversation tonight. And I haven't had any DJ gigs lately, so I think I'll keep my day job.
Probably pays better.
Want to say hey.
It does. It does.
Want to say hey to Connie Taylor, who is here with us, to Nellie Purnell King, who is here. She says good evening to everyone. To Laura Leone, she says good evening and thank you for this program. To Karen Scott, who is here, she's saying good evening to everyone just as well. And to Audrey Jaycox, who is here, she says good evening to everyone. Well, Connie, we've got some good information for you on tonight. One thing I did want to share, we had got a couple emails about talking about stroke. I have something for you. Dr. Pete actually did a little piece on what a stroke is and how to see it and what to do about it. So I'm going to share that in our comments. I shared it on our page, but I'm going to share it in our comments so you can see it on tonight. But we did get an abundance of questions in reference to, is it a mental or behavioral health problem, or is it a physical problem which can be fixed with some type of medication, of why we have something of a disparity among ourselves? Well, what is the disparity, I must ask? Is it that we don't like each other or we don't like ourselves? Is this a mental or behavioral health problem? Can it cause hypertension? Well, Dr. Mason, I know this is something that you have touched on before. Why don't you take it away?
Yeah, well, thank you, Nikki. And I look forward to the conversation about the stroke from a physical point of view. And the stroke is just really that manifestation of a number of things that have seemingly happened all together. And it didn't happen just all by itself. And there are many factors, and I'll let Pete talk about that because he's the internist, and that's what we do. I would only add that one of the major things that I'm looking at, and will be visiting the University of Illinois School of Pharmacology, with more importantly a focus on going into the School of Pharmacognosy within the College of Pharmacy to look at how foods mediate our diseases. And there are many things that can help us mediate the problem. Some of them are what you just mentioned, but most of it is our dietary behavioral pattern, and obviously moving some way does help. But the one thing that we talked about, the one thing that we talked about before, just briefly, and I did a much bigger piece about this for a grand rounds at Rush. and it talked about the when we talk about violence, we talk about violence all the time, but we talk about it very superficially. We don't ever talk about it very, very introspectively and looking at what maybe some of the root causes of some of the violence that we have, especially the violence that we perpetrate on each other. And that's something that I touched on before. And so I went back to some of my talks, and I'm not going to belabor it too long, but one was a video I probably can still watch. It's called A Girl Like Me. And it was done by Kira Davis. It was viewed or aired on Oprah Winfrey's show. And it was a young girl who was worried about and wanted to talk about her own experiences being a dark-skinned Black girl. And apparently there were some significant things that were happening to her as a result of that. And she then put together what became a doll test, where she decided to figure out, is this something that other children were feeling as well? And when she did the doll test, and if you ever want, we can always show that at another time. But when she did do the doll test, and she asked Black children about which doll was the nicer looking doll, unfortunately, most of the children picked the white doll. Most of the Black children picked the white doll. And it was very eye-opening to her to see this. And some of them, in fact, one little boy, because I have watched it several times and I've used it in presentations, but one little boy, when he touched the white doll, smiled and what have you. And when they asked him, which one would you like to be, he actually grabbed the white doll, but then had to stop, pause, look at it again, and then reluctantly turn his head and pull it back, because he knew that it must have come to him that that's not possible. And I say this because, Roberta Flack said it well in her song, Where is the Love? And that love's got to start with self first. And if we don't do that, and if we've lost part of that, which I believe we have, and that is what's driving what we see in a lot of the trauma and the violence and the seeming disposable attitude that many people have about a human being. And so Nikki and I were talking about this, and I decided that we would, put that out for people. I know it's not always comfortable talking about, but that study has been repeated by a University of Chicago professor who found the same results decades later, that these children, our children, still had these very same negative images of themselves, but even as importantly, that these things were shared by white students, that the white children that were interviewed. And so it means that where I sit, it means that we've got to do a better job in affirming our children and affirming who they are, and not to be ashamed. There was, in this one part of it, and I'll stop in a moment, there was an episode where the little girl wanted to pour bleach into the water to help lighten her color. And she had been told by members of her family that she's not attractive because she's so dark. And we don't talk about this. We act like it doesn't exist. But for the listeners, people out there listening, if it's true, let us know. Let us hear about what your experiences have been. And right now, as I mentioned in one of the other segments, skin bleaching cream is a $10 billion international industry. Skin bleaching cream. And it's not just women that are doing it, it's men too. In fact, I have a picture of one of the boxers in Ghana who bleached his entire body with the bleaching cream. So we need to talk about why that still is, where that comes from, and how, because we got to remember, we always talk about racism and everything else, but we don't talk about some of the other things that it's done and how it's being perpetuated. So I'm going to stop here, Nikki, and allow my colleagues to weigh in, if that's okay.
Terry, I know there's another thing that you always mention too, which is about the ACE scores. That Dr. Fioretti came up with, the adverse childhood experiences.
Mhm.
And like you and Nikki were discussing, I was talking with my barber about this, that our kids, and I really see this as a sense of responsibility, like they are suffering from poor self-images, and they lack and need guidance. And but unfortunately, some older people feel afraid. They're afraid of these kids, like my barber was showing me, his kid goes to Simeon, is a basketball player at Simeon, and he just showed me a video, and he's like, these kids were fight. You'd have thought it was like a prison or something like that, because they were fighting in the hallway, and he was like, the trauma that's happening to these kids. He said, even my kid, who is not involved in that, but has to see that and doesn't know when that might just randomly happen. Just random. It wasn't a big deal. Like somebody said something about somebody else, and it went into a mayhem. Now, let's be clear. We used to scrap too, but these kids seems unhinged. It's like it's unhinged, and I think so much has happened to them as a child. Look at those ACE scores. They've seen so much. Some of it's abandonment. Some the fathers are not in the homes. I was literally fearful of my dad ever hearing about me doing something crazy. I was fearful about my basketball coach finding out. I was fearful. I mean, I had positive men around me who were sorry about the noise, but who I was held accountable for. There's nobody these kids feel accountable to, including the person that they should feel accountable to, which is the dad.
If I can just jump in a little bit, I think that there are a lot of other things that we have to look at that's attributing to, there are what I call subliminal kinds of activity that goes on that imprint certain things in a person's mind because they see these things. Nobody is saying that you're less than or more than or equal to or not equal to, but just the portrayal of what we see put an image in a mind, and those images grow because the process is a continuous process. And there's a positive thing that like I said, subliminal, and nobody is saying that. But when you see, it's like, if there's something that's occurring, or there are two situations. One you see as a helpful situation, and one as a situation that may cause you harm. And if we tend to sort of stir that pot and lift up the one that is going to cause you harm, then therefore you begin in a subliminal manner this is not an intellectual thing. It is something that's sort of embedded into your brain to begin to think that these are negative things. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be like that. And then you get, and so when this starts happening to young people who haven't seen the things that we're talking about, even though we're teaching them, and intellectually, once their mind is mature enough, I believe that they can intellectualize it. However, it isn't just the children; it is also the adults having this same this same thing going on, in terms of they may not say the same thing that if we give them the Dawes test, but their behavior, their activities will oftentimes uh, 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 carry on this same kind of process in a different kind of way. And our behavior oftentimes is transferred. It's not always what you say, it's how you act. That our children see those activities, and then they will make assumption and learn from that. And so we transfer things sometimes without intentionally transferring. We're not aware sometimes of what we are doing, and we're doing things and embedding negative effect on who we are, and therefore our children see that as that's who they are. And so we have to look at that and it becomes a thing where we have to be a lot more cognitive of the things that our children are being exposed to, as well as the thing that we're exposed to, and how do we overcome it? How do we combat it? And that's a huge issue, because on a regular basis, these subliminal images are just being projected. And so you're not, you know, unless you're out there, you don't have any kind of media exposure, which is zero people of the population, then you are getting these images. They're coming, constantly coming at you, and therefore, so I think that we have to look at that as well as when we try to solve this problem. Yeah, we need a lot of teaching, we need a lot of encouraging, but we have to figure out a way. How do we deal with these images that are projected? And when I say images, I mean, if we just look at who is doing what, who is in the position to control what, who has money, who has this, who has that. Those are images that tells a story, that gives an impression, and it's those kinds of things that we have to figure out how do we overcome that, and how do we get to a better place in terms of helping our children and helping ourselves to make a better have a better understanding and make a better evaluation of who we are and who others that look like us, who they are.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in, and I'd like to start by picking up on something that Dr. Pete talked about. And he did mention, and Dr. Mason actually commented on it, the adverse child experiences study that talks about trauma in early childhood and how it impacts people. But one of the things about, and if you've read up about the ACEs study, adverse child experiences study, and you've looked at the ACE pyramid, one of the things they said that always struck me as interesting is how some of these experiences early in life can actually cause your brain to be rewired and cause you to make different kinds of choices moving forward. So trauma early in life can affect you. And there's this term called neuroplasticity. And the brain, we know, can be rewired to function differently. And so what Pete was talking about in terms of ACEs, and what we know is that early trauma can affect individuals, and it can cause them to behave in a different way. So that's one point I wanted to make, that when we talk about ACEs, we need to understand some of the science behind ACEs and what it is talking about. The other thing that I've been very interested in and doing, looking into, is the development of the prefrontal cortex. And that's around the forehead of the brain. And it's the area that's responsible for skills planning, making good decisions, and things of that nature. But the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until your late 20s, if not sooner. So what I've started to think about, why do we expect teenagers to make good decisions in the first place? Anybody that's been a teenager knows that teenagers don't make good decisions, and all of us have been teenagers. And then I know there were some things that I didn't make good decisions about. When I got into my late 20s and 30s, I started to make better plans, better decisions, and do things better moving forward. And the last thing, just picking up on what Dr. Mason was talking about, because he was describing a kind of self-hate that's been researched and studied. But what we're really talking about is self-identity, and how we identify ourselves, and how we identify who we are. And so that can be skewed too by some of these things moving forward. And if historically and even currently you're portrayed in media and other forms as being less than other people, of course people will consider themselves and think about it. One of the things, and I'm old enough, and some of the people that are on this program are old enough, and I know Dr. Mason is old enough because I know how old he is. But I remember growing up, and some people probably never heard about it. It's the brown bag test. It was a test that was used to determine whether or not you were light enough to pass. And I remember being teased because I could not pass the brown bag test. And I felt bad because, and I didn't know why, but I knew I could not pass the brown bag test. But later in life, and the 60s were a real good period in life for me. I found myself, I found my awareness. I like everybody else, I became black and proud, and I remain black and proud to this day.
You know, Joe,
Well, outstanding, outstanding. It's funny you would say that, Joe, because my dad preached a whole sermon one Sunday on the brown test, the brown paper bag test. And the ushers were at the door of the church with these brown paper bags. And that determined where you sat that Sunday at church. And his sermon really talked about how we treat each other. And it was a phenomenal sermon, but it was a wake-up call. I want to share just a few comments that have come in. Our great guests over at the Core Center are working, but they said, Dr. Miller, and they said to all of the doctors, and Dr. Miller, thank you so much for your comment. Complications of a narcissist, increased risk of high blood pressure and heart disease. However, these narcissists cause more damage on their victims. Yes, we call them victims because narcissistic abusers have abusive behavior, and people under their prey become their victims. They cause victims chronic stress, premature aging, weight gain, and or loss, and it can also cause suppression immune system problems. Wow, that is really deep. Thank you so much for that comment. Barbara Ivory also says, this experiment has been done over and over for years. We must teach our children to love themselves, how God has created us to be, our hair texture, our skin tone, our voice pitch. And others have always been a judgmental style of society to say we're not good enough. Well, speaking of not good enough, I have Jessica here on the line who says, it's amazing how we have never been good enough, but everybody wants to be us, from tanning to body augmentation. Okay, Karen Scott is here, and Karen says, Dr. Mason, do you think this thought process is from the house Negro, field Negro thought process?
well, I'd go back and say it's part of it. But what we have to get back to is the root of why it was felt that white was better and black was not. And everything that was good was always was portrayed as as white for the most part. And even everything, including our images of our religious figures in the churches, were all portrayed as white men. And so there was never any portrayal until later of these men and or women being black. And the truth of the matter was they were all the time. It's just that we were never taught that. And so there are a number of things that we have as a result of the what I call purposeful ignorance that we were faced with. And right now, part of what we have to do, but needs to happen, again, Roberta Flack said best, where's the love? Because the problem is, just to back up for a minute, to Joe referenced the Vince Folletti study. And that was the one that everybody popularized when he started talking about adverse childhood experiences. But the problem with Vince Folletti's study is that it was never designed to make the kind of issues around the role that race played, because this study was a dietary study looking at the body images that these women had about themselves. And as a result, the kinds of trauma that they had to experience for that reason. But the thing that I'm really pushing and talking about is we have still, and I still think that we have not really gotten where we need to be in the affirmation of our children, despite the hue of their skin color, and that there is nothing negative about your skin color. There was in the Kira Davis movie, or one of the movies, one of the parents remarked to her, in fact, they were pouring capfuls of bleach into the bath water in order to lighten these children. And Kira was talking about, in one of the other ones, in another movie that came out called A Girl Like Me. And in that movie, it talked about these young girls, because you got to think about it. If a young woman has or young man has a poor image of themselves, they will allow themselves to be used in very bad ways. We find them in destructive relationships. We find them in all kinds of things because they never felt good enough because they were dark. That's the point I'm trying to make, is that this was all around just your skin color. And it wasn't just from whites that folks felt this way, but it was from Black folks that felt this way. And this self-hatred is what drives very many things that have happened to us. And when we look at what has happened and happening in our communities, the sort of ease with which, and I've talked to a number of folks, and on my radio show I've had the young men who've been trying to be the interrupters out there for violence and things of that nature. But the discounting of our lives by ourselves is what is the thing that troubles me the most, and that we've got to figure out, how do we begin to reaffirm ourselves as valuable people? Because we have still a lot of the data that's out there, even not so terribly in the distant past, but still showing that we have these issues. And when we look at it, we find out, and I'll stop here, and I've said it before, this is not just an issue in the United States. This is a global issue. So much so that skin bleaching cream has been one of the largest selling things. It's a $10 billion industry. And I just heard of a group of women from a country who traveled to another country to buy the higher concentrations of the skin bleaching cream that they could get in Europe to bleach their skins from where the African continent from which they come from. And to me, this is a very dangerous situation, because we pass that on to our children.
Yeah, I want to provide some context and just piggyback on what Dr. Mason was saying, only in the sense that I think it's important for people to really understand and acknowledge the concept of race as we know it today has only existed for about the last 500 or 600 years. Race is a social construct. It's not a scientific construct. It's a social construct. It's based upon physical characteristics, skin color, body type. And it was determined that some races were superior to other based upon these characteristics, these physical characteristics that had nothing to do with those physical characteristics. And I've always told people, and that once you drink the Kool-Aid, once you look at race is real, and you buy into that concept of race is real, you will make decisions on the basis of race. It's not something real. It's something that we've all bought into and we accept. I read an article, and this was maybe about 20 years ago, and it was about the disparities, the racial disparities in Brazil. Everybody was brown. Some of the darker shade of brown. The people were the darkest, were the worst off. If you look at India and the caste, the people that are the darkest are the worst off. It has nothing to do with the color of your skin. It's only if people believe that people are different on these bases. And all of us have sort of, to some degree, have bought into that.
Yeah, we actually bought into it because it has been sold to us and perpetrated upon us, and therefore it's almost, yeah, you know, as Dr. Mason and Joe was speaking, and I sort of recall a period in time, you know, during my life, our lifespan, you know, the late 60s, early 70s, when there was this promotion of Black pride, and that behavior was a lot different and we noticed that I noticed the changes in even in terms of how folks began to respond and how they respond to each other as the time passed and the rhetoric and the promotion decreased. Then there was a return to the behavior of, that black was not as good as white. So what I'm saying is that during the period of time when black was being promoted, mainly by black folks, but other folks also began to be to copy that image a little bit more and and seem to even desire it a little bit more. And so what I'm saying is that it's almost in order to be, these things are there not because they're just just something that happens just sporadically, but they're there intentionally, and that intention has continued, and it's dangerous, and so there has not been a counter activity that has been sustained to subdue it. And I think that's we have to look at that. How do I mean, like I said, the one thing that during the time when there was some promotion of that black is beautiful, we began to see more people less inclined to want to be not that people are more inclined to be proud of their blackness. But as the rhetoric died down, so did the pride, so did the behavior. And so we have to look at that, because those are things that I think help us to understand how we can kind of look at doing these processes to change it. The behavior going to change when our mind change, when our mindset change, when we begin to think differently. As long as we don't think differently, nothing else changed.
Just wanted to just interject real quick. This whole notion of what a Caucasian was is a result of people believing that the most beautiful people lived in the Caucasus region of Europe. So that had nothing to do with biology to begin with either. And also the Vince Folletti study, though it did talk about adverse childhood experiences, but it really was talking about some other things as well. And the study that was done in Philadelphia looked at other factors that created problems for children, particularly Black children, in the state of Philadelphia, and I mean in the city of Philadelphia. And it's important that we do that, and we need to continue to do things to help get our children to self-affirm who they are, not by what evil they've done, but by the good things that they have done. And we do that sometimes, I think, rather successfully with sports, but I don't see it as well in some of the other areas. So I just wanted to make sure I put those two things out there, because it's really, really important. And it was not just the girls that were Black women that were, because Black women did a number of things. They did a lot with their hair. They had to do a number of different other things to try and gain that kind of acceptance, because it had been taken away from us.
Stroke.
Well, I'm sorry, Congressman, go right ahead. We didn't hear you.
The question is, do these negative feelings of self contribute to incidences of stroke?
Congressman, hypertension will, distress will, all these things can cause spasm of blood vessels, which interrupt the supply of blood to the brain. I think accelerated age, atherosclerosis of the arteries, clot formation. So it would be my impression that the answer would be yes.
Yeah, I would say so too. And even if it's inadvertent. So if you have higher catecholamine levels, norepinephrine, epinephrine, cortisol, these stress hormones that are responsible for saving your life, right? So if you're in a street, in a traffic situation, and a speeding car is coming by, these hormones protect you by flooding your blood system for opening up the blood vessels and speeding up your heart rate. But what happens when you're not in the middle of the street, but you're at your office and you're experiencing, racism or stress from not being able to provide for your family? What if you're constantly under duress because of these images of who you are? Then these cortisol levels and stress hormones are there constantly, and that raises the blood pressure and predisposes you to the stroke.
Yeah, let me frame it differently, because cause and effect is an interesting thing. And so what we can say, and we can say this unequivocally, that there is a correlation. Then when you see one thing, you see something else. You might not be able to prove cause and effect, but there is a direct correlation to some of the things we're talking about and the outcomes that people have. It goes back to what Dr. Mason was talking about earlier about this whole concept of food as medicine. There's correlation between the food you eat, how much food you eat, how much you move, and other things to all of these diseases we talk about. And that's the same thing for hypertension. There is a direct relationship. Can we show direct cause and effect? No, we can show the relationship, but they seem to work together. So if you don't eat right, you don't move a lot, you consume substances, and I'm talking about drugs and alcohol or cigarettes to a certain degree, you're asking for trouble, and you increase the likelihood that you're going to have a problem. But then if you're under stress and some of these other things we've been talking about, and you have low self-esteem, those all play into the same thing, and whatever condition you have is going to exacerbate it. It's going to make it worse, not make it better.
Joe, you make a great point in that's one of the things that when we talk about this and when you watch something, especially the one that they did called Dark Girls, and one of the girls says that I took my skin color, was dark, after my father, and I hate him for it. That's a powerful statement. That's a very, very powerful statement. And she doesn't forgive him for it. And one of the other conversations where one of the girls that they're talking, and one of the mothers says, could you imagine how much more beautiful my daughter would be if she had any lightness in her? And to me, when you hear parents talk about that about their children, and we end up with these very negative images of who we are, and we don't see any images that confirm us in a more positive way, because oftentimes when we go to our places of worship, that's lately it's been more affirming than it's been in the past. But early on, none of those images help affirm anybody of any dark color of anything. In fact, it was always a question was, where did I fit? Was I even important to God? So there are a number of layers to this, and I'm just putting it out for people to just think about and to understand that these things, though we don't talk about them much, have very profound effects in our own lives. And when we think about who we are as a people, and then we think about about some of the stuff that people have been able to talk about in a record and get paid lots of money for it, to help spread this kind of thing, to spread this sort of devaluation of who you are as a person, so that if you do some things that are untoward, it doesn't matter, because you weren't going to live that long anyway. And I've actually been around, and I can talk about my experience in the county trauma unit, where people were shot and come in, and the language I can't say it here on this particular media at this time, but we had to install bulletproof glass in the trauma unit at county, because oftentimes if they found out that the person was in the trauma unit and hadn't died, they wanted to come in and finish killing them into the trauma unit. So I'm just saying this is real. And only people who devalue the value of themselves and other people that look like them will be really doing this kind of thing. And I know we're getting out of time here, but I really want to thank my colleagues for their input. And I want us to begin to think about this as we go along, because unfortunately we don't have enough that helps affirm who we are. And when we don't have things that affirm who we are, and I thank God for all the Black history stuff that's been going on, but that's a month. How do you do this on an ongoing basis?
365. Karen Scott shared some of those words that you said in the comment section using some very special characters. When we call each other those names, and she has great characters next to them, you guys can see her comment in the comment section. Also, Barbara Ivory says, children are taught to have esteem for themselves. Parents should start kids out with exercise to motivate common sense decisions. Laura Leone shared Sammy Sosa, and she shared how he's looking right now and how she feels about how he's looking. Laura Leone also said every day, and I believe she's speaking in reference to just having pride for who you are in yourself. Barbara Ivy also says, thanks for the knowledge about the way we see ourselves. And Karen Scott says, the music too, say it loud. I'm Black and I'm proud. I'm an adamant James Brown listener. We also have an anonymous question that says, when can you tell the difference between confidence and a person who has low-grade narcissism? Well, don't all of you jump at it at one time. Go ahead.
I'll jump in there, because someone who has confidence doesn't need to put down other people, doesn't need to act vindictive, doesn't have to shame, doesn't have to say, use bad language, and can take criticism without getting angry. Narcissists will get angry if they're criticized, will depreciate, will demean, and say things that are meant to be spiteful and hurtful.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that too. On a personal note, where there was one person was dark and the other person wasn't, and the reference was made to them being extremely ugly and looking just like, and this person happened to be a blood family member, that said that you're just like your Black so-and-so daddy, or something like that. And so those are the things that hurt people, and they hurt them sometimes for the rest of their life. And I'm sure that there's somebody's listening to this right now who have had this kind of this thing happen to them, and maybe still have not been able to recover from it because they don't think they're worth the recovery.
Okay, experience the new McDonald's with me. It's
Joe, you look like you got something to say.
I was just going to pick up on something that Dr. Mason said, because he talked about hurt people, and it reminded me of the statement, hurt people hurt people. I mean, that's essentially what it is. If you're broken, sometimes you want other people to be broken too. You'll bring them down to your level so you won't feel as bad. So there is a challenge, that a lot of us, our spirits have been broken, and they're hurting, and so the only thing that they can do is share that hurt, or try to displace that hurt onto somebody else. So it really is a difficult situation.
And sometimes the way they fulfill or think that they have power is by the way they can hurt other people, not just verbally, but shoot them or what have you. Because, and then I've been around where some of them say, well, I don't care. My life ain't worth that much. So I don't care if they kill me. I don't expect to live but so long anyway. I mean, it's just a lot. And I would really implore some of the people that work with our youth. And I have on one of the Sundays that I do my show, I have Dr. Karen Taylor Crawford come in, who was a child psychiatrist, talk about some of this. So thank you, Congressman. We appreciate this opportunity you've given us to have this conversation. And I pray in some small way that if there's somebody out there who's been hurt by, because no one hurt you like your parents. And when your parents say something very negative about you, you may live with it for the rest of your life. So I would caution or admonish any parent from saying negative things about, someone's skin color in a negative sort of way, because their skin color is not going to go away. And they may take that pain with them for their entire life. I've seen it and we've talked about it.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on something that Dr. Mason said, and it gets back to this issue of homicide, which is a big problem in Black and brown populations. But what you have to understand is we lose a lot of young Black and brown men between the ages of 16 to 34. They're no longer here to be productive members of society. For whatever reason, they're no longer here. They're no longer here. And that has something to do with lower life expectancy. If you use losing a lot of people between 16 to 34, they're not only not going to contribute to society, but they're not going to be fathers. They're not going to be able to do anything relative to society to help society moving forward.
I think that we all have to, as we are discussing it, and obviously there's recognition of the negative effect that has been put upon our children, upon all of us, that we have to do more in terms of, number one, making certain that there's a presence that can show value in a way that our young people understand value and can help to lift them and help to be that kind of a mentor that can help them to not think of themselves in a negative way, but to be, because they see other people that look like them doing something positive, being positive, and speaking positive. That those are the kinds of things that if we can that we need to do a lot more of. It's not that it's not being done at all, but we need more. And in all of our settings, we need more of that. And those are the kinds, if we want to have change, that's part of what is going to have to take place. That more of those kinds of images, so that now you have something young people have something to measure that against, and something to help them to heal. I mean, healing sometimes, as a physician, we know that healing can sometimes take place if we can really remove the pain. But we have to have something to remove the pain. Otherwise, it just doesn't disappear. It's there, it's embedded. And we have to be able to do something to help that individual overcome that pain that is causing them to really behave and to accept an image that isn't really the image that they should be accepting of themselves.
Lastly, I would say that the one thing we have to do is not leave out the commercial industries. The commercial industries have capitalized on this pain, and they have allowed and created and promoted the kind of music and some of the kinds of lyrics that are out there now that help to make this even worse. And so I did a whole talk about talking about that too. But we've got to look at where this is, and wherever we can, wherever we are, we need to be thinking about how we do a better job in making sure that we speak life which is uplifting, life which is self-gratifying, not self-gratifying, but helps them be great, feel good about themselves going forward, because the industry has profited on this by putting out millions and millions and millions of records for millions and millions of dollars, which are just terrible. If you listen to some of the lyrics, you would be amazed at what is being put out there. And these young people are being paid to help produce this kind of social venom.
All right, Linda Johnson says, so true. That is so true. Well, I know you guys hate to hear me say this, but it's our time. You know, I want to share a quote. Power at its best is love, implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. That was shared by Dr. Martin Luther King. Well, our until next Mondays. Go, Doug.
Thanks, Nikki. You know, I've been really powerfully moved by what I've heard tonight. I also agree very strongly with Dr. Mason about the commercial industry. And I think about how blockbuster movies have changed in the last decade. And that all we're seeing are explosions. James Bond, you could probably count 40 deaths and assassinations in a James Bond movie. I grew up with 007. So I think it's not just music, but it's entertainment and video games that's taught us to devalue life. And we can vote with our dollars, not to support it.
Absolutely. Dr. Miller, you're until next Monday.
Well, I think that it's important that we begin to look at alternatives to what we do and what our young people see, and it has to become our purpose, not just something that we do occasionally, but it has to become our purpose to change that image within the mindset of our youth, because that's what it's gonna take in order for them to be able to overcome much of the negative images that has been embedded in their brain. And we talked about all the things, whether it's what the parents call the kids, how they talk in front of the kids, or whether it's the things that they see on television or on some of these other platforms, and just what they see in life. I mean, I think we really do have to see that this is not a facade. This is reality. It's real, and so we have to do something to really offset this real thing that's going on, to create this negative image in people's mind that ultimately cause them to become destructive of themselves and those that look like them.
Outstanding. Dr. Mason?
Judge Eugene Pincham said, "You can't be what you can't see," and that was one of the things I always remembered from Judge Pincham. His daughter was in med school with us, and so I think that's really important. And the thing is, we just got to make sure our children are in places where they can see what they ought to be, and that's why Congressman Davis, the work that you have been doing, trying to make sure that we have opportunities in the schools like the University of Illinois and the College of Medicine and all the other areas that we can begin to do and be the kind of people and contribute to society some of that value that we have.
Outstanding, and thank you. Joe Harrington, you're until next Monday.
Well, I had three, but I'm going to drop it down to two in the interest of time. The first, and Dr. Mason made me think of this. He made me think of you. He made me think of the lyrics to Coolio's "Gangsta Paradise," and that might not be what he wants to hear. But one of the phrases in that is, which really reverberates with me and might reverberate with this audience. Tell me, why are we so blind to see that the ones we hurt are you and me? That's what we've been talking about. The other thing is that occurred to me, the antithesis of self-hate is self-love. And so what I would encourage everybody to do is to love yourself. Because if you don't love yourself, you can't love anybody else. And I'm also asking everybody to help us teach our children how to love themselves and how to love others.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. Just want to remind everyone that February is Go Red Month. Go Red Month. Congressman Davis kicked it off really big on Friday with the National Day of Red. Cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer of women, and it affects nearly 45% of women ages 20 and older. But many women, particularly our young women and our diverse women, still remain unaware. Raise the bar, raise awareness. Wear some red this month, and remind everyone about Go Red. Congressman, take us home.
Well, February is also Black History Month. And much of what we have heard tonight, I take the position that medicine is good for whatever ails you, that you need some kind of medicine. Doesn't always come in the form of a pill, a syrup, or even a shot. And what we have heard this evening has been medicine for the mind. I'm thinking of a fellow named Sir Isaac Watts, who said one time that from a base black to a lily white, were I so tall as to reach the ocean or grasp it with my hand. No matter how you reach, the mind is the standard of the man. And the guy who, Carter G. Woodson, the founder of Black History Month, week, day, whatever, a Chicagoan, was fond of writing and saying that if you control a man's mind, you don't have to tell him what or what not to do. He said that if you control a man's mind, you don't have to tell him to go to the back of the bus or go to the back door. He said that if you control the man's mind, he will find his place and stay in it. And my good friend Lou Palmer used to always say, I urge you, don't ever go to the back door. That you get yourself an axe, a knife, a hammer, and cut a hole in it or knock it down. And when you always go through the front door, don't go alone. Bring somebody with you. And so our minds have been elevated tonight with this discussion. And I agree with Lou. We should never go to the back door, which means we should never think of ourselves as being less than what Muhammad Ali always taught. And that was, I'm the greatest. That was Muhammad Ali's message. I am the greatest. Or even what Reverend Jesse Jackson always taught. I am somebody. I may be black, but I am somebody. I may be disadvantaged, but I am somebody. And so if we can get the mindset, I'm reminded of a fellow who used to ride a horse, and his horse would always jump over the highest steeples or the widest ditches. And somebody asked him one time, said, how do you get your horse to always jump these hurdles? He said, well, it's easy. He said, once I can get the horse's mind over, his body will follow. And so once we get our mind over, then I think the rest of us will follow. And the rest of our being will follow. If you can believe it, you can achieve it. And if you believe you can do it, you will. So we close out the beginning of Black history and health on Black history with the saying, I was at a funeral Saturday, David Milner's, and of course my Alpha brothers were there, and David was an Alpha, and the Alpha guys always had to learn these poems and all. And of course, we just had a bunch of them Saturday. But I end with this one that simply says that if you think you're beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you think you want to win, but think you can't, it's a cinch you won't. If you think you will lose, you've already lost. For out in the world we find success begins with the fellow's will. It's all in the state of mind. If you think you're outclassed, you are. You've got to think high to rise. You've got to be sure of yourself before you can win the prize. Life's battles don't always go to the swifter or the fastest man. But sooner or late, the woman who wins is the one who thinks she can. So think and grow rich. Have a wonderful night. Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure. And I trust that our viewers and listeners have enjoyed this as much as I have. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good.